If you know, you know.
It's TCA in stereo.
From the city to the lake, we make a noise.
It's TCA summer sessions. It's TCA summer sessions. It's TCA summer sessions. Let's go. It's TCA summer sessions. It's TCA summer sessions. It's TCA summer sessions. Let's go. Let's go.
What's going on, good listener? It is Monday morning on the Tall Can Audio Podcast for you. It's currently Sunday evening for me, catching the last few moments of sunlight here on a Sunday at the cottage. I'll be joined in just a minute by Tom Harrington from the CBC. We're going to talk a little World Cup fallout with him. We're going to talk about Russia being welcomed back into the Olympics. We'll do some looking around the international sports landscape. I just want to remind you that if you missed it last week, we got in depth with Steve Bunda on the Ottawa Red Blacks, a little MMA talk in there, a little bit of hockey talk. Even in the dead of July, we were able to find a few things. So that's up on the feed right now at tallcanaudio.com. And coming up this week, you're going to hear from Robert Munich, who works for the Nation Network, covering the Flames, doing some social media stuff, covering the Jays. And he had a great piece up last week talking about kind of the ever-decaying sports landscape for Canadian fans on the heels of Rogers upping the price on their Sportsnet offering again here, the online Sportsnet Plus platform jumping up in price again. He went in depth about that in a piece he wrote that I will link to in the show notes, and thought it was a good time maybe to talk to him, see get his take on this stuff. So that'll come up later this week as well. The cottage sessions will continue to come, but for now, we'll talk to Tom Harrington. Let's get right to it. A guy who was kind enough to make a little time for us before the World Cup. I have asked him to take a little time out of his busy summer now that the World Cup has wrapped up. He's been kind enough to do it. Tom Harrington, welcome back to the show, man. Thank you for doing this.
Appreciate it, Matt. Good to talk to you.
I'm curious in a general sense here. I want to talk to you about how Canada did as a host, kind of the lasting impression of the tournament a little bit. I've also got a question or two about the Olympics for you. But just in a general sense, I'm kind of curious how you evaluated Canada's performance on the pitch. I think for a lot of us who are kind of newer to the sport, it was great to see them get out of the group stage, which they'd never done before. They won an elimination game in the round of 32, which was new to everybody, and came up against a tough matchup in the round of 16. I think the people I follow who know the sport a little bit better might be a little bit less charitable and say that, a tie against Bosnia is not great. You beat up Qatar, who was legitimately the lowest ranked team in the tournament. You got a break in the round of 32 with South Africa showing up. I'm sure the truth is somewhere in the middle. How did you evaluate Canada's performance?
Well, the first thing I'd say, Matt, is it's great that we're having this debate about their performance because it means we care about the sport.
Sure.
And this is what mature soccer countries do. They do this all the time. And I think that's really important. And it's a sign of the passion and growing knowledge base in the country about the game. Notwithstanding that, I think I would probably err on the side of those who felt a little bit more was possible from the Canadian team. But at the same time, I would also say you can only play the teams you're presented with, including
Sure.
South Africa. So they may have gotten a lucky draw by playing South Africa. I mean, South Africa's not a slouch. They're pretty good. But Canada won the game, a game they should have won. The games they should have won, like Qatar, they did. Bosnia, it's a small country. Could they have beaten them? Probably, with a few breaks. Don't forget that was their first game. That was in Toronto. An awful lot of jitters, especially in the first half, where some of those key misses were. And so I wrote off a little bit of the performance to just nerves. It's one thing to play at the World Cup in 2022 as a surprise arrival and score a goal against Croatia in that one, if you recall.
Yeah.
And so that's one thing. Now we're on home soil, and we're playing an opponent that's not as good. They're pesky, and they showed it. So that game probably was the one that people felt was the one that got away, I guess you could say. But also, given the circumstances, I'm not surprised it ended up being a draw. I actually thought they might be able to beat the Swiss, but it turns out the Swiss were pretty good.
Yeah.
Seeing how far they went in the tournament, and against Morocco, I mean, the first half with a bit of luck and a bit more finishing, they might have at least won or drawn the game and gone to penalties or whatever. Morocco's a really good team, as we saw in the tournament as well.
Undefeated in like 3 years or something like that.
Yeah. And Switzerland was also in a really good run coming into the tournament as well. So, the expectations of beating teams like that may have been a bit unrealistic, but I think overall it was very encouraging. And don't forget, losing Kone the way we did.
Yeah.
Was really damaging. He was the guy I thought might be the breakthrough player for the team, but he never really got that chance. I think losing him was significant, and not having Moise Bombito on the back line until later in the tournament also is a factor. And Canada's got more depth than it had 4 years ago. So I think overall I would give it a B. I would say for Canada, maybe a B plus. And don't forget the core of the team is still relatively young, and so in 4 years' time, this still will be a pretty solid group of players, and there's more young talent coming up. So, it's a good time to be a soccer fan in Canada. It's an optimistic time, I think. And so on the field, I would say it was a relatively satisfying performance.
The one name you didn't mention there, and there was a lot of conversation about, was Alphonso Davies. And I think he ended up playing just like 6 or 12 minutes there in the one game, wasn't available in the round of 16. Mm-hmm. I think Jesse Marsh was taking some criticism about whether it was worth it to even have him on the roster. Of course, the counter argument is, there were guys on the roster who didn't even play, and if there's a chance you could get Davies at some point in the tournament, you want him around. But I don't know, there seem to be some head games about maybe he'll be available, maybe he won't, trying to mess with your opponent. Did you have it? I'm sure Bayern Munich had somebody's ear at the Canadian Federation. They have a sizable investment in him. What did you make of the whole Alphonso Davies of it all?
I don't think it was a really good moment for Marsh and the management of the team. Let's say the whole Davies affair. I think he should have been on the roster. There are a lot of players on rosters and a lot of teams in this tournament who never played a minute, who are good players. So the fact that he only played a few minutes is, he's an important player, but it was clearly not enough. And I also had a problem with Marsh saying that essentially that he was available when he wasn't.
Right.
I think that's not. It's not exactly lying, but it's not being forthright. And I think especially in a sport where there's betting going on and that sort of thing. And as you know, like the NHL has you have to make announcements around your roster health. The NFL every weekend you announce players who are available or not available. So you really can't. I don't think he should have done that. I had a problem with that because he said he got the right reaction because the Swiss were not sure if he was going to play or not. And I said, well, that's not a reaction. That's just kind of, I don't know. I thought it was juvenile.
Right.
So, and I really do think Bayern had a big role in this. I don't know why there's been no more further reporting on this since the tournament ended about Bayern's role, because I suspect, I read that there was a doctor, or at least
I read
Bayern
the same,
official, with the Canadian team monitoring Davies, and so that's problematic. I mean, it's not unusual for professional clubs to have minders over their players. Certainly, there are more important players at these kind of events, but I don't know if there was meddling involved, or I don't know if Bayern was talking to the Soccer Canada saying, we didn't like the way you handled his previous injury, and we are a little wary about how you use him now. He's not 100%. We don't want damaged goods when the tournament is over. So, and it's interesting enough, the Dutch, the team I follow and have for many, many, many years, have Frankie de Jong, their midfielder. He was hurt during the World Cup, and apparently the injury turned out to be far, far worse. Ooh. And Barcelona, where he plays, are absolutely furious with the Dutch Federation over this. So it's not common, it's not unique to Canada that this situation with Davies occurred, but I don't think the Federation and Marsh covered himself in glory with the way they handled Davies. A healthy 100% Alphonso Davies would have made an immense difference. In fact, you remember after he came on, that's when Canada got the goal against South Africa.
Yes.
So, because he made space just by his speed and skill. So he would have made an enormous difference. Having him as a kind of a red herring or a decoy or whatever Marsh called him, and using him that way, I don't think was appropriate. But that's just me. I'm a bit old-fashioned, I suppose. But it's unfortunate because he really would have made a difference. But again, he will be around in 4 years, and assuming he's healthy, he'll be essential to the Canadian effort if we're going to make the next World Cup.
Yeah, I don't know how much, as a competitive balance thing, I don't know how much I would want the head coach to be worrying about the fans. But if you're as dedicated to trying to grow this sport in this country as he seems to be, the other thing that would be on my mind a little bit is how much you're confusing new Canadian fans who maybe only know 3 or 4 names on the team, and he would be one of them. And you keep telling everyone, yeah, he's available, and then you don't use him. Like some of us are sitting at home on our couch now going, well, if not now, then when? It would be, similar last year, the Blue Jays picked up so many new fans. And, if John Schneider keeps saying, yeah, no, Vlad's available to come off the bench tonight, and there's all these big moments and he never plays, people get confused. I guess if you're a head coach, you've got to be thinking more strategically. And I guess if you think you can get in the other team's head with this, maybe you go ahead and do it. But I think it was frustrating for a lot of new fans as well.
I don't disagree with you. I think there were a lot of newcomers watching the team and following the tournament and following even the sport during the last 6 weeks, in not just in Canada but everywhere. So there may have been some confusion or bewilderment that Davies didn't play when the coach indicated he was available, whatever that means.
Yeah.
But I think the risk of alienating fans, I think Marsh wasn't thinking that way, even though he's very big into building the sport that way. He's ultimately trying to be a tactician and a manager in the traditional sense. So, there are people who are going to criticize him for it. That's part of the job. I don't know if you just saw recently, Jurgen Klopp was hired by the German Federation, the former Liverpool manager, and set some pretty basic terms coming into the job. And among them was that the media, for example, starts attacking him personally or his family, he'll leave. Wow. He's got a 4-year deal, but he's got an out, no compensation, he'll just quit. So managers have only a certain amount of power, and in Marsh's case, he was trying to build towards something, which was this tournament, and then build upon it at the same time. Mm-hmm. So I think on that level, I think he was successful. I think Marsh is the kind of manager that many players would want to play for because he is passionate. He's a team builder kind of a guy. He's accessible. He's a former player, played in MLS for many years. So I think he's the right guy for the moment for Canada, like John Herdman was to get the team to the 2022 World Cup, but then his time left and there needed to be somebody else to take him to the next level in terms of performance, which Marsh evidently did. Will he get it? Will he get Canada to the next World Cup? He's going to be given the chance, I assume, and I think he should be given that opportunity. But at the risk of alienating some fans, if people like the game generally, hopefully they'll continue following Canada's team and the sport because as you know, I'm very passionate about football, soccer, and I think it's there's a reason it's the number one sport in the world. And what was enjoyable, and I think we're going to talk about the impact off the field in Canada, the impression left by the two host cities. I think that was very positive. I think Toronto and Vancouver acquitted themselves well.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. I can tell you're a media guy. You know how to make these connections. How did you view? It was kind of funny to watch at some point once the tournament, or at least the Canadian team, moved from Toronto to Vancouver. There became, as there always is, kind of a friendly rivalry between the West and between anybody that isn't Toronto, and kind of who had the better marches and who had the better atmosphere and stuff. But both cities ended up seeing some pretty good games the way it all shook loose. We'll start in Toronto because that's where you are. Did it feel like the tournament was in town? Did it have kind of a vibe around the city, or was it kind of limited to the Liberty Village area there close to the stadium? What was it like around Toronto?
I would say that, if you live in an area like I do in East End Toronto on the Danforth, there are a lot of pubs and restaurants, and they were always packed for watch parties for games every day, particularly when Canada played. So there was, a nice buzz in my neighborhood around the tournament, and in other neighborhoods across the city, based on what I heard from my friends and people posting on Facebook and Instagram, things like that, their own experiences as a fan in the city. And because of the ridiculous ticket prices, only so many people could go to those games anyway. Yeah. And I think clearly the ticketing policy was a much deservedly criticized decision by FIFA to price the tickets out of the atmosphere for the average person, especially because the average person was paying part of the bill for the actual tournament. Yeah, the municipal budgets of Toronto and Vancouver, those people were paying, but they couldn't afford to buy a ticket. So, but the watch parties, were quite successful, I think, and certainly the buzz around the watch parties and the bigger watch parties closer to the stadium and in the Liberty Village area around BMO Field were quite good from what I understand. So I mean, there were only 6 games here, but generally speaking, I think the feeling in the city was that it was fun. I mean, the people who didn't want the tournament here, who didn't like the inconvenience or just thought it was a waste of money, you're not going to change their minds. They thought it was a waste of time. So I think the people who did get involved enjoyed themselves. And I posted on Facebook before the tournament that I felt that if people were entitled to criticize and do whatever they want or boycott or do all the rest of it, but those who wanted to join, don't begrudge them a good time. And hopefully people will realize that it wasn't a bad thing for Toronto. The idea that it put Toronto on the map or even Vancouver, I think is kind of silly because people around the world kind of know where these two cities are. Toronto's the New York of Canada, Vancouver's hosted the Olympics. It's nothing new there. So, what I said to several people was what I thought was important, and I think was the case, that people around the world watched us Canadians loving the game the way they did, because it's the most popular sport in the world, but we've been on the outside looking in for a long time. So now it was in our house and we had a party and we had a good time, and you saw the passion of Canadians in both cities, and the other thing was the incredible diversity of both cities, which really came out strongly. I think it was a very powerful, positive message of all these different communities living in one big city and in 2 big cities, and sharing their passion for the game. So I think that impression was powerful to the rest of the world. In terms of, as I said, putting us on the map, I don't think that's beside the point. I think it's more about soccer fans in Germany or in Brazil or in Sweden or in Australia watching Canadians, the hockey place, watching soccer with such passion and love for the game and knowledge of the game. I think that's the most important, probably, image or impression that's left by the tournament.
I'm one of those guys who is a bit of a nerd for the media side of it as much as the sports side of it. So I go looking after just about any big Canadian moment for other calls from other networks, right, from other parts of the world, just to see how it is being viewed and how it's coming off. And so, yeah, it was interesting as some of these games I would put on the BBC radio feed or whatever else. And there was always a little in the home of hockey being mentioned or whatever. Yeah. But you could tell like they were largely impressed or taking note of the fact that this was a soccer mad crowd that was showing up. It knew what they were talking about or knew what they were looking at. And I think that is important. I think if you're going to build a program, you don't want to feel like the runt who doesn't belong at the party, right? And so to have part of your, be partly hosting the thing and show that we do care about this thing, may allow some other people to take some more pride in it, knowing that you did a good job on the international stage. I'm with you. I don't know if Canada itself needed to be put on the map, but Canadian soccer, I think, was helped being put on the map.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
In a general sense, if we zoom out a little, this 3-way project of Mexico, the United States, and Canada all being part of the hosts, there was some political tension certainly going into it. We talked a little bit about that when you came on before the tournament and how this was going to be viewed. It sure seemed like, there was a moment or two here and there, and there's always stories before a tournament of like there was a referee that wasn't allowed into the country and some things like that. But it sure seemed like the influx of people who came to watch the tournament were coming away largely positive about all 3 countries. But I want to focus on the United States for a second, because that was the one that we were a little worried about. How is this going to come off? It sure seemed like when the Scots arrived in Boston or the English in Texas, I saw at one point, like everyone seemed to be online, at least tweeting, and when it was going viral, the host cities seemed to do a nice job of embracing everybody. I think some people who came expecting the worst, got a far better experience. I think this is supposed to be one of those things. The Olympics are like this too, where there's a ton to be cynical about. But at the end of the day, when you get your boots on the ground, you can really have a great experience here. And I think this probably came off far better in America than I would have expected.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, people forget, but because because of the current political circumstances, that Americans are a friendly nation.
Sure.
They're friendly people. They're among the most friendly people in the world, actually. So the fact that, as you said, the Scots or the Brits in Texas or the Dutch in Kansas City and many other fan nations who came to enjoy the tournament were welcomed and were treated with such great hospitality wasn't a total surprise to me, frankly, because I just knew that the Americans would embrace the visitors. And the moments of humanity throughout the tournament were extraordinary, not only between players on the field and afterwards, but between fans. There was a great example. I think it was Brazil and Japan played, and Brazil scored late to beat the Japanese. And on the field, one of the Brazilian players was comforting a Japanese player who was crying on the pitch after the game was over. And outside the stadium, about 20 minutes later, there was a similar scene of a Japanese fan being consoled by a bunch of Brazilians.
Oh, wow.
The Japanese fan was crying, and it was almost identical, but one was on the field and one was off the field. And that, to me, sort of symbolized not only the World Cup, but also the experience of the fans who went there, that they were there. There's not a whole lot of there's always a few scraps, and people are talking about hooliganism. Well, hooliganism is the '80s in England.
Sure.
It's I mean, I've been to England. There's no hooliganism anymore. It's not at the Premier League level. I mean, that part of the game has changed a lot. I mean, there are still scraps and fights between fans in different cities when big games are being played, like in the Champions League, that sort of stuff. But generally speaking, the violent nature of the fan violence in soccer is kind of passé. So what you saw for the most part,
spending that kind of money, you're not getting thrown out of the game, right?
There's that, yeah. But even if you're at a pub or at a whatever, you're not going to see that kind of thing as much anymore. It just doesn't happen. And the World Cup is a celebration of the game, but it's also kind of a celebration of the world, because unlike the Olympics, and I've done those, and I've been in Olympic cities, they're great, but it's nothing like being in a World Cup host country, because it's the only sport everybody cares about.
Right.
And so you have people from literally all over the world who care about their team, but care about the sport. And so they're really not going to, get into it with other fans and lord it over them. There's a real passion. They appreciate the passion each country has for their team. And so that part of it was really moving, I thought. There were a lot of moments on the field and off which were very powerful, particularly in the United States. And this sense of wonder from the Americans about the World Cup, and that wasn't really there in '94 when the tournament was held there before. Of course, it was a smaller tournament back then, and while the Americans did a great job, and there was a similar kind of vibe, because of media, the changing media environment, we see more material, we see more things on social, that sort of thing. So the sense of how big or how it was impacting the United States back in '94 didn't seem as profound as it did this time, where you got this. Not only did the Americans enjoy themselves watching the Europeans or the Asians, whoever was there in their cities, but just like the kind of the passion they had, because the Americans love sports.
Sure.
But they love all kinds of sports, or they may love one sport more than another, like football or hockey or basketball or baseball. So to see this passionate group of people from another part of the world coming to their city and sort of enjoying the tournament was kind of like, their eyes are popping, saying, wow, this is really something. And I don't remember, maybe they don't remember what it was like in '94. Certainly that's, 32 years ago. So you're talking about maybe a generation or so who knew nothing about that. Mm-hmm. This is brand new to them. So I think, I'm not surprised the Americans did well in terms of host cities. I do think, obviously the affair with Trump and Infantino over the Balogun red card was ridiculous.
Yes.
And was a black mark on the tournament.
The way the Iranian team was treated was not
treated. Yeah. So there were a lot of examples of those sort of mishaps, if you will, or miscommunications or misunderstandings or downright, corruption that are going to plague it. But that's the great thing about the World Cup. It's like life. There's all that stuff happens in life too, There's also good stuff and bad stuff. It's like social media. It's like bad stuff and good stuff. So, but there was an overwhelming amount of good stuff out of the World Cup in all three countries, as well, Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. So from that standpoint, I think you'd have to say it was a successful event.
I think one of my favorite takeaways was from literally, I think, night one of the tournament. There was a video that made its way around on social media. You may have seen it, of the South Koreans celebrating in Mexico at some bar down there, just throwing back the shots of tequila and the Korean pop, the K-pop music blasting, and the Mexican fans are right there dancing and celebrating with them. So there's some cool lasting memories like that. Oh
yeah, I think that's what makes it so special, is that those kind of moments, like I follow the Netherlands. Holland is my team, and the Dutch, the Orange Army, they're called. When they go places, they go big, and you probably saw the orange bus that was driving around, and these massive like dance things, side to side stuff with like 12,000, 15,000 people on a street in Kansas City dancing, like that sort of stuff. People they don't do that in America. No. So those sort of moments I'm sure Americans are still talking about them wherever they live, that they saw that or experienced those kind of
Red Sox things. Game or two that the Scots were doing their chants all the way through. Like that stuff is so much fun.
And drank all the beer in Boston. That's legendary stuff, 100%. Right? And then I don't know if you noticed, like after Scotland was eliminated, the either the Scottish airline or the Scottish government had these posters in Boston saying all over the city billboards within like a few days saying, come back and we'll treat you the same kind of deal. Right?
Oh wow,
that kind of message. So these are the things about the sporting, the event itself that are you can't calculate, you can't build, they just happen.
Last thing on this. There's been some talk already that perhaps it will return to the United States. Anyway, we haven't heard anything about the triple host again. In 2038, they're, I guess, talking about expanding the field one more time, and that perhaps because of all the infrastructure and the football stadiums already in the U.S. And do you think it's too soon to be talking about that, or does the way FIFA work, does that make a lot of sense to you with all the money there is to be made in North America, or is this just post-tournament excitement sort of still boiling over?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of that, because, it is too soon to talk about coming back to North America. It's like, right. Well, I think it's more important to talk about what's going to happen next time, which is, and I've been hearing this for a little while, but apparently it's probably going to happen that 2030, which is the 100th anniversary of the World Cup. I don't know if you've been following this, but so the tournament's actually going to open in South America because that's where it was held. So the Paraguay, Argentina, and I think Brazil are going to host a game each. And then the tournament switches to a triple host. It was Portugal, Spain, and Morocco are the triple hosts in 2030.
Right.
And there will be 64 teams, not 48.
Yeah.
Now, that's still not confirmed, but Infantino apparently wants this because, and he said apparently it's going to be a one-time only, which you don't really believe. Once the toothpaste out of the tube.
Same with the hydration breaks. You're not getting rid of those.
Yeah.
They blamed that on North America and RTV and all that. That's never going away.
I disagree with you. I think UEFA's already said they're not doing it in Europe. So they're only going to do it when it's hot as blazes. Then they'll have hydration breaks. Other than that, they're not going to do it.
Okay.
So I think we're going to, and I don't think we're going to see that in MLS either. Plus, MLS is switching.
I just meant in the World Cup. I don't think it's going away. There's so much money to be made selling commercials, but I could be wrong.
That's possible. It will anything. Well, under Infantino, almost anything's possible at this point. but 64 teams, I think, is a massive mistake. There aren't 64 nations worthy of being in the World Cup, in my opinion.
Right.
And I think I know people were going to, well, what about Curacao and Cape Verde? And I said, well, they parked the bus in every game.
Yep.
They did well by, as you know, Cape Verde wasn't beaten in regular time by either Argentina or Spain.
Right.
So, all credit to them. But at 48, we're kind of pushing the envelope in terms of quality. Infantino wants this idea of an inclusive World Cup, especially for the centenary. But at what point is it too much, and at what point does it make a mockery of the fact that it's the elite soccer competition of the world? I think that's the problem I see. Plus, this is all laying the groundwork for the Saudis to host in 2034, and there's a whole other level of problems with, in my opinion, hosting the tournament in Saudi Arabia. Again, over politics, among other things. Yep. And also we know in Qatar, and for example, the issues developed leading up to those games where slave labor was used to build venues, and Infantino himself and his family lived in a mansion for a year on the dime of the government. The year leading up to the World Cup, there's all kinds of, and plus even how Qatar won that bid is really, really suspicious. There's a lot of talk about that. So, where Infantino is taking FIFA is to uncharted territory, and there's a risk, that it seems to me that the only danger to soccer is soccer itself, if you know what I'm saying.
Sure.
Because it is the most popular sport, but at some point you have to really be careful. And I think the pricing in North America was an omen that you can't start gutting people's wallets in order to satisfy this need for money. I mean, I think, I'm not sure if I read this recently, but I saw a number like that FIFA made something like $9.5 billion from this World Cup.
Yeah.
Now, the theory is, generally what they say they do is they reinvest that into soccer infrastructure in the world, around the world, especially in countries that don't have as much as other countries do. But it also does, it buys votes for Infantino because he's under heavy scrutiny because of this Balogun red card affair with Trump. And there are a couple of other issues that have come up around the World Cup, including, Argentina's run and how they got there, and all the speculation about officiating and all the rest of it. So there's some questions being asked about Infantino, but he always wins because Africa supports him. Generally speaking, the Asian countries support him. Even the South American countries support him. Europe is the one place where he doesn't have as much support, but people claim or believe that a lot of the reason he's in there is because he's able to make the money work for him in terms of getting the votes of the delegates to FIFA to keep him as president, excuse me. So it's going to be an interesting next year or so for Mr. Infantino.
Well, let me take you from one organization in FIFA that is hardly beyond reproach to another in the IOC, who has announced over the last week or so that they would like to see Russian and Belarusian athletes be more welcomed back into the Olympics. I think there's one thing that some people don't understand, and that's that the individual sporting bodies do have a say in this. I believe the International Track and Field Union has already said no. We're not prepared to start allowing that. But in a general sense, the Olympics' overarching ban on Russian athletes appears to be, if not already lifted, on the verge of being lifted. Are you surprised by this? The war in Ukraine is not over. There is no indication that Russia is getting ready to pull back, which, in my opinion, simplistic as it may be, should have been the one and only criteria. When you get out of Ukraine, you can return to international sport. That's not the way this is appearing it's going to play out. Were you surprised to see that they're trying to push ahead and bring Russia back in?
Yes and no. I'm surprised in the sense that they are clearly tilting against the public opinion windmills of like people saying no, they don't belong, with this IOC kind of naive belief that because sport unites the world, inviting Russia back will somehow make the Russians back off in Ukraine or be nicer to their neighbors, which is what the reason Moscow got the games in 1980 was this is the days of the Soviet Union. And when the IOC gave Moscow the games at that time, it was a massive story because this was the communists. This was behind the Iron Curtain. This was the great menace to the West. And the IOC's belief at the time was that it would somehow make the Soviet Union / Russia now into into the community of nations in the world, and would be a way to sort of bind East and West.
Didn't exactly work in Berlin in '36 either.
Right.
At some point, we should learn some lessons here.
And we had a boycott in
yes.
And we had a boycott in Los Angeles after that because of Afghanistan. So the invasion of Afghanistan. So it's like, remember how you guys didn't, there was a boycott because they invaded Afghanistan. So why are we welcoming invaders back this time? So, I think it's ridiculous and hypocritical. It shouldn't be happening. It's the idea of Russian athletes competing against Ukrainian athletes on the field of play is nuts. It's a classic tone deafness from the IOC. This has been a long-standing issue with this organization, is they kind of go their own way and they kind of ignore what the sentiment of not only the sporting community, but the world community is. So the fact that they're considering it, I'm not so sure it's going to happen yet. I'll wait to see. I'm still not sure that it will happen, that the Russians will be invited back officially. And as you said, with the IAAF and other, like I think the International Ice Hockey Federation is also pushing back on this idea. So I think there's a long way to go yet before Russia and Belarus are welcome back into the Olympic community. The overwhelming number of athletes in every other country in the world, even though they believe in competition and all that, also believe that what the Russians are doing is wrong. So I don't imagine they'd be supportive of it and would be very vocal. And there are athletes who sit on IOC committees, as you know, and so they're in those rooms saying, don't do it. Don't do it. Our country is opposed to it. Our federation, our athletes don't want to compete against the Russians until they stop this war. And people will say, well, the athletes are not the government. I said, well, yeah, but Russia, sports in Russia, much like the old East Germany, is propaganda.
Yep.
And so any athlete who's competing for the Russians is there not just because they're out there to compete for gold medal and their family. It's because the government wants them to be on the podium. And look at Mother Russia. So Russia is right now viewed by the world as a criminal organization, and they don't belong in the Olympics. And so I think the IOC's got a really, really hard sell to make this happen. Particularly, there's no reason to do it. The Russians, as you said, have been in Ukraine now for 4 years, and the reason this ban happened was because of the invasion. Mm-hmm. They're still there. They're still fighting. They're not negotiating. They're bombing and killing civilians, and somehow they've still worked themselves to a position where it's acceptable to bring them back. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and there was a time, and maybe I'm pulling at straws here, I don't know, but there was a time where you would never, ever make this decision or to try and bring Russia back while they're doing this, when literally the very next games are in the United States, it's supposed to be the beacon of peace and democracy and everything else. And yet, I don't know, like with this American government in power, it doesn't seem like it would be an issue. They're actively engaged in other places in the world right now. Like I think there's some hypocrisy, certainly, about, what the Americans are doing in Iran and still being allowed to host the games. I think my thing, and you did allude to it, is how much of this gets downloaded onto the athletes, and what does it mean for them when they step onto their field of play during these games against, like you said, if you're a Ukrainian and a Russian, even to come closer to home, while the NHL has been trying to get back into the Olympics, which they did here in the last games, and host World Cups, there's been a few times where Gary has sort of suggested we are open to talk about bringing Russia back into these events, but our Finnish and Swedish and Czech friends tell us they won't compete. And to me, that's offloading responsibility onto those countries and almost throwing your shoulders up going, we'd bring them back, but these countries won't let us. That's the wrong view. Like, you should just know better that it's not time to do this. It's for those athletes and those players in hockey and then these other sports heading into the Olympics. It's just another distraction they don't need. It's a responsibility that shouldn't be on their shoulders. They're going to be asked questions about it as they're leading up to it. It just seems horribly tone deaf, I believe is the term you use. It's the right one.
Yeah, I think in the NHL's case, where they have, unlike all the other North American sports, basically, they have Russian players and in the league. So when a time comes for international competition, particularly the Olympics, not the World Championship so much, but for the NHL, where they have professional Russian players under contract playing for NHL teams, then the Olympics come and those players don't get to go. The NHL's in a uniquely awkward position because they're kind of advocating to be in the Olympics, but a portion of their player population is not allowed.
Sure.
And so I think that's what I assume that's what the commissioner is trying to navigate, if you will. There isn't a crescendo that I know of. I mean, I don't follow hockey like I used to, but I don't think there's a crescendo of NHL players saying the Russians should be back in the Olympics. So
there's been enough Swedish and Finnish players who have actively stood up and said, if the Russians are welcomed back into this next World Cup you're planning, we will not play.
Yeah, and I think that's the right approach, frankly. And I don't know if Canadian players have said that as well, but in the way
not
the
really yet, no.
And also because Sweden and Finland are on the border of Russia, and Russia has threatened to invade at least one of them. So
this would be a lot more personal issue to them.
Yeah, I think that the geography is a lot, right? So, but at the same time, so I think Bettman's been trying to walk and chew gum at the same time. He's basically trying to show support for the players of the league, that includes Russians, but at the same time trying to toe the line internationally and saying, if they are a pariah nation in Olympic sport, for example, then that includes hockey. So it's a tightrope he has to walk, and I'm curious how long he'll keep walking it, because I hear there's a lot of talk about him leaving in the near future. But the NHL has to kind of negotiate that. I mean, they've gotten past the last Olympics, and we'll see what happens with the next one. But it's a challenge for them, no question about it.
100%. Always fascinating around the world of international sport. There's always politics, always intrigue, always fascinating undercurrents under the events. I appreciate you making some time in what I know is a busy summer for you, Tom. I appreciate it. I hope I can come calling again.
You bet, Matt. Good to talk to you again.
All right, there you go. Always appreciate Tom's time. He's spent an awful lot of time covering World Cups, covering Olympics, stuff like that for the CBC. Appreciate his perspective there. Like I said, we'll be back later this week to talk to Robert Munich about the decaying state of being a sports fan in Canada. Like I said, he's got a great piece on that we will link to in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this one. We will talk to you a little bit later on in the week.
TCA Summer Session.